the items that we will be going over today will be on the department's webpage, located on the screen. All of the important dates, information, documentation, links is all on the department's website, as well as the application itself. The program goals. The RFSI is intended to strengthen local and regional food systems by expanding the middle of the food supply chain, creating new revenue streams for Pennsylvania producers, and to establish more, new, and better markets for locally produced foods. The middle of the food supply chains means activities that occur post harvest and prior to reaching the consumer. Allowable activities include storage, processing, aggregation, and distribution. What is the middle of the food supply chain? The middle of the food supply chain includes all activities after harvest and prior to reaching the consumer, which would be processing, aggregation, and distribution. Pennsylvania has received $26.5 million for the RFSI grant program, which the department did decide to split this into two separate applications. One focusing on the infrastructure grant, and the other one is the equipment only. The infrastructure grant program opened on January 15th and will close on March 30th. This presentation will solely focus on the infrastructure grant. The equipment only grant, we will be offering the same type of presentation once that opens, and that grant program will open April 1st, and the application due date will be May 15th. So for the infrastructure grant program, the award amount, the starting would be 100,000 to 3 million. There is a 50% match required unless you do qualify for the 25% reduced match. Allowable expenses would include the equipment and construction supplies, facility upgrades and constructions, construction personnel, and training. Just a little bit about equipment, just touch on it. The minimum is 10,000. The max is 100,000. There is no match requirement, and the only allowable expense would be the equipment. Again, there will be a presentation that will go over this more in depth. We also did split the allocation with an 80-20. So we will be making awards for the infrastructure grant program at 19.3 million, and we will be awarding 4.8 million in equipment only funding. An eligible entity. An eligible entity for this grant program is any agricultural producer or processor, nonprofit organizations, local government entities, for-profit entities, but you do have to meet the eligibility of the small business size standards. There is a link within the slideshow, and there is one on the website. And this slideshow presentation will go onto the website if you need to reference it at any time. And then as well as tribal governments is an eligible entity. An eligible project. Eligible projects would include expansion and modernization of current facilities, construction of a new facility, equipment purchases, enhancing employee safety, construction of watershed management facility, improving operations through training, develop, customize, or install equipment that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and projects that increase efficiency in water use, improve air and or water quality. RFSI funds cannot be used for agricultural production, including farm equipment, tools, supplies, gardening, or production related labor training. On-farm post-harvest processing, preservation, and cold storage are allowable activities, but it must be in accordance with the program scope and requirements, which again are listed on the department's webpage. Ineligible projects would include acquiring real estate property or land, projects focused on meat, poultry, or other ineligible products, projects funded by other federal award programs, projects that have already received funding through another federal grant, and claim expenses that have been or will be reimbursed under any other federal, state, or local government funding. The match requirements. The infrastructure grant program recipients are required to contribute 50% of the total proposed cost of the project, meaning that if it is a $200,000 project, 100,000 would be requested from the federal funds with the cost share match amount of 100,000. Reduced match. There is a 25% reduced match requirement for historically underserved farmers and ranchers, small disadvantaged businesses, women-owned businesses, women-owned small businesses, veteran-owned small businesses, and those definitions and eligibility would be listed on the website as well. Links to USDA's definition to see if you would self-certified for that reduced match. Again, the total project amount would be 200,000. The federal funds that you would request would be the 150, with the cost share being the 50,000. What is considered allowable match?
Morgan, I think you muted yourself. We missed the whole last slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's back up. Did we do the allowable match?
We didn't hear that part.
Okay. So thank you. Sorry about that. The allowable match. So allowable match would be considered the personnel, time, labor related to the construction, the value of rental or the lease of the building, the value of the equipment or the equipment rental, or anything that's used as match must be an allowable expense cost under the RFSI grant program. The match documentation requirements. Anybody applying for the grant must maintain records identifying the specific cost or contributions that constitute the cost sharing or matching, the funding source or contribution, and how the appropriate amount of the contribution was determined for reporting purposes. We're going to jump into the submitting of the actual application and what is required. When submitting an application, the department does utilize the single application for assistance. What is required is the infrastructure grant template, the evidence of the critical resources, letters of support, match verification, and the NCRA if requesting more than 10% indirect. If your organization has a negotiated indirect cost rate and you are seeking to request more than 10% of indirect cost, you would have to provide that documentation as well. The priorities that have been set forth by the department, we'll go over those before we jump into the actual application. The Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture will prioritize funding projects that pertain to the following gaps identified in the middle of the food supply chain in Pennsylvania. Projects submitted directly by growers, producers, processors, shippers that support middle of the food supply chain activities. projects that benefit historically underserved farmers, projects that enhance worker safety or facilitate compliance with the food safety rule of the Food Safety Modernization Act, any type of shovel-ready construction and infrastructure project that can reasonably be completed within the grant duration. Projects that facilitate training opportunities, including training that's related to food safety, process modernization, and use of equipment or enhanced facilities funded through the RFSI grant program. Projects that further dairy processing in the state, projects that further value added processing for fruits and vegetables, projects that focus on organic commodities, particularly in processing, and projects that will serve food deserts as defined by the USDA census. Again, the department utilizes the single application for assistance. Some of you on the call may be very familiar with this. We have had some people who have struggled to find it, so we'll just take a few moments to go over how to locate the application. This is the login when you go to the single application for assistance. You want to begin a new application. So the first thing that's going to ask you is the project name. So you're going to list the title of your project in that box, and that you're going to select that you are applying on behalf of your organization. And do you need help selecting your program? The answer will be no. The next page will take you to this. You'll fill in the program name, and all you have to do is type in resilient, sort by the program name, and search. And you will come up with a Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grant Program, a brief description, as well as the program fact sheet, which is a link to the bulletin notice, which announced the grant opportunity, and the guidelines, which is the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture's request for applications. So what is a project? What are we looking for? A project is a set of tasks with cohesive, distinct, specified, and defined goals. Follows a plan, organized approach over a fixed period and within specific limitations. Uses resources that are specifically allocated to the work of the project and usually involves a team of people. And also having a limited duration with a definitive beginning and end time from start to end. And having an overarching goal that the applicant wants to accomplish through a series of individual activities or tasks. One of the requirements of the application is the grant template. The next few slides are going to go over the specific requested information and sort of what the department's expectations are around what the department's expectations are as you are filling out this grant application. So the executive summary. So the executive summary is for a brief description of your project, and it must be 250 words or less and should include your organization, your purpose of the project, and a description of the general tasks and activities to be completed. There are project objectives and outcome indicators that have been identified by USDA that as well are on our website. The project objectives are what will be accomplished during the project if you are selected for an award. And the objectives should be brief but clear. The objectives can be measured by the outcomes of the project, and the competitive applications will show a clear link between the objectives and the outcomes. And I apologize, you list your objectives, the outcomes are identified by USDA. Your project beneficiaries. Any direct beneficiary is the applicant. The estimated number of beneficiaries should include local and regional producers that would benefit if the applicant were to receive the award. And below is the example of what you would list. Again, within the grant application template, we're looking for a synopsis that kind of explains, who, what, where, when, why. The outcomes and the indicators. The outcomes and the indicators provide a framework that allows for the progress and activity to be tracked. The outcome is the result, while the indicator is the way of objectively measuring the outcome or the result. Again, example listed below. Another outcomes and indicators is outcome 3, increasing economic viability of local and regional producers and processors. Within this section, any of the indicators 3.1 through 3.5 that does fit within your proposal, you will provide the expected numbers. If it's not applicable to your project, you'll just click the NA. The budget narrative. The budget will show the total cost of the project, as well as the breakdown of the cost by category, and provide a justification for each expense in each of the categories. So the budget narrative will include the funds being requested in a chart, the match amount, as well as the justification. The match amount, you'll be able to choose whether that's an in-kind contribution or if that is a cash match. This is what the budget narrative will look like. You'll fill it in for the funds requested, the match, and again, this area there will be a drop down for whether the match is in kind or cash contribution. The expense categories for this grant include personnel, which is somebody whose time and effort is directly correlated to the project. Fringe benefits, which are benefit rates for each of the employees described in personnel. Travel would be any trip that's being requested must meet the federal travel regulations. The equipment would be for special purpose equipment to be purchased. Supplies are defined by USDA as less than $5,000 per unit, which would be material supplies and fabricated parts. Construction is administrative and legal expenses, structures, architectural and engineering fees, site inspections, site work, whether that's demoing, removal of construction, or expansion of the facilities. Anything contractual would be any contractual agreement or consultant services as part of the project. And any other expenses would be anything that does not fall within one of the previously mentioned budget categories. That includes conferences or rental expenses. When you're filling out the budget justification, this is an example for the personnel. This is kind of what we're looking for here, a clear explanation of what John Smith, who he is, and what he will be doing and how it relates to the project. This would be the justification. Personnel 1. Mr. John Smith is the CEO of the ABC producer Packers and will oversee and manage this project. It is expected that Mr. Smith will contribute 20% of his FTE hours over the course of the project. And if we could link in the project timeline that you plan to accomplish the work. Mr. Smith makes $100,000 annually and will contribute 20% of his time to the project for a total of $20,000. Half of his time he contributes 10% FTE will be in kind for a total of $10,000. Excuse me, 10% of Mr. Smith's time contributed is requested for funding at $10,000, and the other 10% will be the in-kind contribution at $10,000 for a total of $20,000. And it will also go over Mr. Smith's responsibilities as it pertains to the project. The budget narrative justification. Each budget category will have a justification narrative section explaining what the expense is for, how it is critical to the project's objectives and outcomes, and how the cost or price was determined. A well-written budget narrative will allow reviewers to easily understand how you derive the cost from the funds being requested. For items, services, and labor, you must provide and attach estimates or quotes. Indirect cost rates. The indirect costs are typically administrative, clerical, and facility maintenance costs that are not specifically related to the project. Any non-federal entity that has excuse me, never received a negotiated indirect cost rate may elect to charge the 10% of the modified total direct costs. Indirect cost may count towards match. Again, if you do not have a negotiated indirect cost rate, the maximum that you can charge for indirects would be 10% of the total direct cost of your project. Other requirements within the RFSI grant application. The recipients are required to have a UEI number obtained through SAM.gov at the time the awards are made. The department is strongly encouraging applicants to obtain this UEI number before applying. Again, we strongly encourage that, but it must be in place at the time of award if you are awarded. Selected applications will be submitted for USDA review on or around May 1st. Any selected applications missing this UEI number will be omitted. Another document that is required in addition to the project grant grant application is the letter of critical infrastructure. So this is a document that it's evidence that there's critical resources and infrastructure necessary to support the initiation and completion of the project that is in place. Land, structure, and other critical resources must be in place and in working condition at the time of application submission. The letter must indicate what the critical resources that are necessary for the initiation and the completion of the project and certify that they are in place and committed prior to the start date of the project. Letters of support. Letters of support should explain why the project is worthy of funding. An opening statement that identifies the project, the program where the funds are being sought, and then followed by one or two paragraphs that would indicate the relationship of the writer to the effort seeking the funding, and then followed by a closing statement. This comes from a business, a grower, a producer who would benefit from the project. We are having that it is required that you would submit one. Applicants may submit up to 3, but no more than 3. A well-written competitive letter will demonstrate the quantify the benefits resulting from the applicant completing the project proposed. So in addition to the grant template and the critical infrastructure documentation is the match verification. So the match is only required for infrastructure grant applications. The match verification is required for each type of match. If you plan to use in-kind contribution and a business loan, you will need to provide 2 forms of the match verification. Examples of match verification would be a letter of intent for in-kind contribution, a letter of pre-approval from the lender, or a letter of intent from the investor, or if it's a cash donation, the letter of intent from them as well. All of the applications that get submitted to the RFSI grant program will be competitively reviewed. And as they are being competitively reviewed, they are looking to ensure that the application is complete, including all the documentations that are required. Is it being submitted by an eligible entity? Is the project Do they have eligible activities listed within the grant application? Is it responsive to the priorities that we have identified here in Pennsylvania? Does it demonstrate financial viability, technical feasibility, and readiness? Does it describe market impact and opportunities? And does the project demonstrate community impact and support, including labor and workforce considerations? Pennsylvania is very forthcoming in how your project will be scored. Scoring criteria is listed on the screen and within the slideshow presentation. It is also listed in the department's request for application. You can find it there, and this is exactly how your project will be scored by the review committee. And I'm going to skip back to that one, but I want to talk about the timeline for the grant program. So we did release the RFA January 15th. It does close on March 30th. The competitive review process will occur between April and May. The selected projects will be submitted to USDA in May for final consideration, and then they are expected to review them between May and June, and the final award announcements we are hoping to occur in July. One of the frequently asked questions, excuse me, that we receive is, how does the review process work between PDA and USDA for projects that receive funding? So the Department of Agriculture's administrative and competitive review process helps to ensure that the proposals recommended by USDA for funding are timely and important for Pennsylvania agriculture and comply with all program rules and regulations. USDA does have the final say with regarding the proposals and which ones receive funding. USDA may approach PDA with questions on specific proposals, in which case PDA will work with the applicant to resolve any issues. In some cases, USDA may ultimately elect to decline the proposal. But if this does happen, if you are selected for funding and this does happen, our goal here at the department is to ensure that we assist you with getting those questions addressed so that we can move on with the award process. So that concludes the slideshow presentation. I am going to bring up the frequently asked questions that have been frequently asked. We will also, this is posted on our website. It is 11 pages long, so I am going to only pick out the ones that seem to be very helpful in this process. And I just want to remind everybody that questions should be emailed to the RA business account. I do believe that Corinne has dropped that in the chat. Like I said, our afternoon session was very successful. A lot of questions were technical. So again, if you can please direct those questions to the resource account so that we can handle them as they come in, address them as they come in. So that being said, we will bring up the frequently asked questions. Again, this is on our website as well. And the first one would be number 3, and it is, how does the applicant determine if a proposal is appropriate for the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grant Program? So again, all proposals must support the middle of the food supply chain, meet one or more of the program priorities that we've identified in the request for proposals, and be able to achieve one or more performance measures during the grant duration to be eligible for this program. In addition, all applicant businesses and organizations must be domestically owned, and applicants' facilities must be physically located within the state of Pennsylvania. We also talk about, we link the USDA definition for the underserved farmers, as well as small businesses, beginning farmers. Number 6 is one that we frequently get, is, where do I submit my application? Again, the single application for assistance, for technical assistance with any anything within the application that you are unable to figure out, address, those would go to the Enterprise eGrants Customer Service Center. Those representatives are available Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 6 at the number listed. Emails can be sent to the eGrants help@pa.gov. And any of the technical questions in regards to the grant programming should come to the Business Development Center's resource account listed there. I don't know who all has jumped on to the actual application itself, but I did want to take a moment to bring this up to kind of walk through what this looks like and what to expect on that end, and address some of those frequently asked questions as well. Excuse me. Once you locate the program within eGrants, as shown within the presentation, the first question that you'll be prompted with is, do you qualify for that reduced match? So if you do, yes. If you don't, click that. You want to continue. Anything within this application that does have a red diamond is a required field that must be completed. You will not be able to submit your application unless all of the red diamonds are addressed. One of the common questions that we get is, I can't figure out my NAICS code. So this will auto-populate. Say I'm a limited liability partnership. I'm incorporated in Pennsylvania. I do business in Pennsylvania, and I am in educational services and junior colleagues. And it's going to, again, auto-populate the NAICS code. So sorry, I went through that a little fast, but again, once you click your applicant entity type and answer the questions prompt to the best of, where you fit, as long as you're continuing to select one, this will auto-populate for you. You'll be required to do the project overview. This is just the name of your project. Again, it does ask if the project was related to another previously submitted project. It just asks you some simple questions, whether you talk to somebody at the department. The project site, in some instances, your headquarters may be different than your site, so you'll want to list your site location here. The narrative section and the budget section within the application here are pre-filled. You do not need to complete these. They are addressed in the requirements within the addenda section. So everything up until the addenda is where your key information is going to be, and the required documentation is going to be that those documents get uploaded to be a completed application. So within the addenda, another common problem that we're having is that this here is the actual grant template itself. When you bring it up, it may look like this. What you'll want to do is you'll want to save this document on your computer, say your desktop, and then you click out of it, and then you'll go double click it on your desktop, and it will come up and it will look like this. It is a pre-filled document that you will enter all of your information into. And then it also includes your evidence of critical resources, as well as your match verification. A brief overview of the project will also be listed here. You can copy and paste your executive summary into this. And then there's some other required documentation, if funded, that goes into your contract, such as the lobbying certificate, the FAFSA form, and the worker protection form. You are required to have the matching funds up front, and we do remind you that it is federally funded, so you will need to have that UEI number. Once you, excuse me, get through all this, you'll go to the next page. You'll plug in, if funded, who your signatory authority would be if you were to receive funding. The next page is taking you to the application certification. This is where any missing fields that are required will be identified here. and all of them have to be addressed and completed before you may physically submit your application. So once all of this is addressed, there will be a section down here that says to apply. So that's sort of that's the actual application within eGrants. So we'll go back to the frequently asked questions. So we addressed 6. And we'll be going to page 3 to talk about 11, 12, 13, 14, well, most of the page. Can projects take place before RFSI funding is awarded? RFSI projects can begin no earlier than funding distribution, estimated to be July 1st, 2024, and they must end by May 24th of 2027. Any costs that occur prior to July 1st, 2024, or after May 2024, May 24th, 2027. Anything outside that would not be considered allowable. It would not be reimbursable if funded. Can organizations with multiple facilities submit multiple applications to RFSI? No, each organization may only submit one application for the RFSI funding. Number 13 is, are distribution companies eligible for RFSI funding? Yes. Organizations that aggregate and distribute eligible commodities are eligible for the funding. 14, can RFSI funding be used to fund a project that transports donated food to recipients in other locations? RFSI funds cannot be used to deliver directly to consumers, as this is not considered to be middle of the food supply chain. Transportation between aggregation centers or from a distribution center to market would be allowable, and RFSI funds cannot be used to deliver directly to consumers, as this again is not considered the middle of the food supply chain. Can RFSI funding be used to support growing or harvesting activities? What about retail activities? No. RFSI funding cannot be used to support of growing, harvesting, or retail activities. RFSI funding is designated to support the middle of the food supply chain, that is processing, aggregation, and or distribution activities. Can RFSI funding be used to support educational programs designed to help create businesses? RFSI funding is not designed to support the creation of new businesses or development of business plans. Can the funds be used for farm production related activities? No, funds cannot be used for agricultural production activities cost, including farm equipment, tools, supplies, gardening, or production related labor training. Again, please note that this is all in accordance with the RFSI scope and requirements that again is listed on the department's webpage, as well as within the application. So we'll bump down to 20 here. What is the difference between infrastructure grants and simplified equipment only grants? So the infrastructure grants will fund projects that expand capacity and infrastructure for the aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing, transporting, wholesaling, or distribution of targeted agricultural products. This grant is subject to match requirements as discussed within the presentation. Simplified equipment only grants are fixed price grants, meaning that they will only fund equipment purchases and are not necessarily associated with facility upgrades, staffing, or other costs. Again, for the equipment side, it does not require a match for the equipment only grants. Again, you cannot purchase land or buildings with this funding. And can the funds be used to repair and or upgrade existing equipment? Yes, funds can be used to repair or update existing equipment. Another question that we seem to be getting a lot of is, can funds be used to purchase vehicles? So special purpose vehicles relevant to the scope of the work on an infrastructure grant projects such as delivery vehicles, refrigerated trucks are allowable. However, the purchase of general use vehicles are not allowable. Again, this is all listed in the RFSI specific terms and conditions, and that is located on the general use and special purpose equipment section within the terms and conditions. All right. So number 3 on eligibility, are applicants allowed to submit multiple proposals to RFSI? Please select one funding track and submit one application is what is recommended. Which commodities are eligible for the RFSI funding? Eligible commodities include specialty crops, dairy, grain for food, and other sectors. Given that the products are meant for human consumption, eligible specialty crops would include the fruit, vegetables, dried fruits, tree nut, horticultural products such as tea and honey, and culinary and medicinal herbs and spices. Please note that some of the specialty crops, such as the floriculture and the ornamental trees, are not intended for human consumption, therefore would not be eligible for funding. If you have a question about the funding, please reach out. Happy to answer any questions, whether it would be eligible or not. And cannabis is also not an eligible commodity under the RFSI grant program. All right. Is the project eligible if it includes meat and or poultry? Projects supporting the meat and poultry industries are funded through other USDA programs. If, for an example, a food hub processing eligible crops as well as meat and or poultry, the proposal should demonstrate the robust tracking mechanisms that are in place to ensure that RFSI funds are not used to support ineligible commodities. However, note that aquaculture is an eligible activity given the project does meet the requirements of the RFSI grant program. Are individual producers and sole proprietors eligible to apply? Individual producers and sole proprietors are eligible to apply. However, those entities should be able to demonstrate that their proposal provides a broader benefit to local and regional producers, market stakeholders, and the community. Beneficiaries are defined as that are local and regional producers, market stakeholders, and communities, include the applicant organization that will directly benefit from the project. The number cited within the project beneficiaries' response should be a reasonable estimate that can be demonstrated and reported upon the duration of the grant if selected for funding. For these reasons, stating that a project will benefit an entire industry or region is not appropriate response for this question. Jumping down to number 9, are projects required to last the full duration of the grant? So if your project is selected for funding, it may begin on or after July 1st, depending on when USDA does make that announcement, after the execution of the grant agreement, and it must end by May 24th, 2027. And as long as the project does not start before the start date or and after the dates that are specified within the request for application, any duration in between July 1st, 2024 and May 24th, 2027 would be allowable. Please note that there will be no cost extension request that will be facilitated beyond the maximum grant duration, which is May 24th, 2027. And again, any and all outside cost or outside costs that occur before July 1st or after May 24th would not be considered allowable and would not be reimbursable. Performance measures, we kind of touched in that with the presentation. That's all listed here, and it correlates with the request for application that is located, the department's request for application on the website. So we're going to jump to page 10. What qualifies as in-kind contributions for matching funds? So, in-kind contributions may include the value of goods or services donated to the project, such as staff time, volunteer time, supplies, or the use of equipment or facilities. Note that any in-kind cost must be reasonable. For an example, if personnel time is being used, the time must match the actual time spent working on the project. And it must be what the that the individual would normally earn for similar work, and must be reasonable according to the standard personnel rates for similar positions. If funded, the department will have staff that will perform site visits, whether that is physically at the location of the project, or it is a phone conversation. But the goal is to at least make 1 to 2 physical appearances at the site of the project, as well as some follow up calls to just ensure that everything is going as planned with the project. Can unallowable costs be, be used for matching funds? Only costs allowable under the federal cost principles as stated in 2 CFR 200 subpart E. And the program's terms and conditions may be used as matching funds. Whatever's listed in the terms and conditions may be used as matching funds. For an example, acquired real property, including land, is an unallowable cost, therefore would not meet the eligibility requirement for the match. While the rental cost is an eligible cost, and that would be eligible and meet the match requirements for the grant. When are the recipients required to report matching funds? Recipients are required to report matching funds on quarterly invoices and annual reports. Match reported on invoices must align with the match requirements set forth in the grant agreement, and be proportional to the amount of the federal funds being requested. The backup documentation for the matching fund will be subject to the same requirements as the federal funds, meaning that any receipt that you're asking for reimbursement for, any cost that you're asking for reimbursement for, must be accompanied by a paid receipt documentation. And again, you will be required to do the same for the matching fund requirement, whether you are at that 50% match or the reduced at 25%. So, at a minimum, backup documentation should be sufficient to demonstrate the source and the amount of matching funds, and as well as how those funds will directly relate to the overall project. Excuse me. Another one that we're getting a lot of too is, can a proposal supply more than the minimum requirement for matching funds? The infrastructure grant recipients can provide more than the required match. However, this will not provide an advantage during the review of the application. Anything that you list, that if you're listing more than 50%, you will at that time. So if you want to match 75%, you will be required through the life of your project, if funded, to provide 75 opposed to the 50, even though the minimum is 50. If you've listed that you have matching funds of 75%, we will have to see that 75%. So my advice would be, don't list more than the required match, because we have to track anything that is additional. And then, excuse me, the last page, how will the applications be scored? We talked through where that's located. What is the competitive review process and how does it work? They're gonna be reviewed by a group of volunteers with knowledge and expertise regarding the Pennsylvania agricultural industry. And then we also talked about how the review process does work between the department and the USDA for the projects that do receive funding. Again, it's 11 pages long. I feel like I pulled out a lot of the most frequently asked questions that we are really seeing a lot of. Again, this is going to be located on the webpage as well. if you'd like to reference that. So I do believe so. Again, we're not going to answer any technical questions at this time, but if you do have a technical question that you are unsure of, please email the resource account, and we will respond within 24 to 48 hours.
We will also be posting one of these recordings on the website, and you will have access to the slideshow presentation that you guys just saw as well.
Tim, I see your hands up.
When will the equipment presentation take place?
We will schedule that as well. Look for that information it'll be on the webpage. I do apologize up front. I do understand that, the time is against us for these applications for the infrastructure side to be submitted. We've had 2 very, very successful office hours. And again, all of your questions, please email. We don't plan on holding something like this for the equipment only side this late in the process. So again, look for that on the webpage. But again, I apologize that we're this far late in the game, but we are here to answer any questions. We're trying to monitor it and respond as quickly as possible. I personally have been making myself available outside of the 8 to 4 hours, knowing that some people do work between 8 and 4, and the only time to kind of work on these projects are after 4 o'clock when most of us are gone. So I will also drop in the chat my email address. But if you do email me directly, please also include the Business Development Center email, just so that we do not miss any questions, comments, concerns. All right. Well, I thank you all for attending the second session. Greatly appreciated. And again, if you have any questions, please let us know. Have a great evening.